Hey, I've been thinking about making a video on this topic for a while and just kept putting it off. And I was prompted because the other day I was watching the ABC Nightly News with Diane Sawyer, who I think of all the people in the media I despise the most because of her smugness and her condescension and her extreme hubris. And what they did is they did a segment on China in the United States, and they said that, well, American workers are much more productive than Chinese workers. And I guess as far as it goes, that's true. But basically, the whole video or segment had an extremely nationalistic tone, and they failed to point out the obvious reason why American workers are so much more productive than Chinese workers. And it's not because of anything to do with a work ethic. Indeed, I'm sure lots of Chinese workers work a lot more than American workers. The difference, the main difference, the difference that accounts for the huge order of magnitude difference is the amount of capital available to the average American worker. I think the clearest example of this would be in something like farming, where on the one hand you can look at a subsistence farmer who may literally only have his own back and his own muscle power, may not even have a draft animal, and then you contrast that with a farmer who has a tractor and silos and a pickup truck, and the farmer with all the capital goods is going to be many times more productive than the subsistence farmer, and it's not because he's a harder worker or anything like that. And I think that, for them not to even mention that, when that's the obvious, that's at least, okay, you can't say that that's the only reason. There are others, but that is the biggest reason. And for them to fail to mention that, I think, is an omission bordering on nationalistic propaganda. The rah rah, we're awesome, fuck the Chinese, who have been giving us all this stuff for worthless paper, so I don't see why I should have antipathy towards them. Anyway, it prompted me, I think I should do a video on capital accumulation and central planning. We point out that the capital is the big difference. A lot of people then jump, well, obviously if capital is what makes productivity higher, then there is an argument there that the government should produce capital. And this might be, I guess that makes sense, but there's a big problem with this. One, capital is not a homogeneous good. For some farmers, useful capital is going to be a tractor. For other farmers, it's going to be a pickup truck. It's not one thing. And how resources should be allocated and where they should go and to what degree is not something that can be determined by a central plan. So if we go back, I think farming is the best example of it because it's important and most people are familiar enough with it to understand. Say you have, like I said, a subsistence farmer who has only his own back and his own muscle power, and say he cultivates a certain amount of acreage. He could look at it and say, well, if I had more capital, I could produce I could cultivate more acreage, or I could cultivate the same acreage in less time. Let's just say 1 acre. And so currently he uses a hoe, and if he were to have a plow, he could either do twice as much acreage in the same time or the same acreage in half the time. Either way, and then have leisure or time to spend doing something else. The thing is that not every piece of land is the same. Not every agricultural product is the same, and so it's not. A socialist would probably look at this and say, well, we should just give this guy a tractor. Well, it's not necessarily going to be worth the extra effort. A tractor may not increase the yield that much. If you have extremely marginal land, it might not do any good. If you have extremely productive land, it might not increase the output very much. If you have a good that's already meeting demand, additional goods are a waste. And then you also have the fact that you might increase productivity, but not to the extent that it warrants an entire tractor. You know, if I only get 1 extra bushel of wheat per year, that's pretty expensive if you're going to pay a whole tractor for it. And the thing is capital takes resources. So instead of a tractor go back to the plow, if you have a hoe and you want to move up to a plow, you're going to have to defer consumption, either take out a loan, or which entails risk because then you have to pay interest, or save, in which case you will be producing food that you won't consume or sell in the hopes that the hoe will, or a plow will help you out in the long run. And that's a very difficult calculation to make, actually. If you're really wealthy, you can throw your money around, and if you lose, you don't lose too, you won't lose too much. But if you're poor, it's extremely hard to decide, whether it's worth it or not. And to just categorically say, well, we should give everybody a new plow or a new tractor, those all have costs, and you're not even beginning to talk about rational resource allocation. That's why, the Soviet Union, they'd have factories building tractors, which, by the way, their tractors were bad copies of American tractors. They ended up having to just buy American tractors, Fordsons. But in any event, their factories, even if they're producing things, there's no basis for deciding where they should go, who should get them, so on and so forth. And so every single bit of acreage, every single worker needs to be an entrepreneur in terms of what kind of capital they think they want, what kind of capital they need, what they're willing and able to save to gain that capital or to build on their own. Because to some extent people are capable of building their own capital goods, like a barn, for instance, or an irrigation canal or whatever. And so, America, for a very long time, and to some extent, perhaps a large extent even today, capital is created and allocated in this way. And that is why it's so efficient. That we didn't have a central planner in the United States in the 1800s go, we should just switch to cotton cultivation in the South, or wheat cultivation in Iowa, or whatever. It's literally millions of people making choices about what every little acre, and then of course every person is a manager of their own goods, their own property, and they're incentivized to manage that as well as possible, because the better they manage it, the more they will make. And if you have a central plan, that's just not possible. So China has been handicapped because it has had a centrally planned economy. Even before communism in imperial times, the imperial throne of Japan did not try and micromanage everything, but they still directed a lot of resources. And of course in communism, did I say Japan? In China, I meant China. In China, under communism especially, farmers wouldn't be able to decide whether they did or did not need a tractor, whether they did or did not need a plow. Factory owners would not be able to decide whether they did or did not need a new piece of equipment or to replace an old piece of equipment. All those were decided by some bureaucrat, but a bureaucrat is not going to know all the details about every bit of acreage, about the ebb and flow of the seasons, the farmers today who own their own fields, they know about drainage ditches that take up maybe only 50 square feet. They're aware of how that affects, their output and what they can grow there and what they can't. And whether, if you have really marshy land, you could decide, well, a new tractor won't do any good, or whatever. So capital needs to be handled on a private property basis, on the free market, and attempts to centrally plan it are guaranteed to entail misallocations. Guaranteed. And those misallocations are wastes in labor and resources. And they can go far enough if they're taken to a high enough degree, they can basically destroy the society. You can have mass starvation, as they did in many communist countries. So, just a few thoughts, not a comprehensive view, but I thought I'd share.